Hi, you're on Reddit Confessions. And today, I'm going to tell you how my silence became the loudest thing she's ever heard. There was a plate of scrambled eggs sitting on the counter. Still steaming. Perfectly made. No toast. Just eggs the way she liked them when she was hungover. She never touched them. She walked past them 3 times. Once to check her phone in the hallway. Once to look for earrings she might have left in the bathroom. And once to fix her hair in the mirror. Not once did she glance at the plate. She had a smile on her face I didn't recognize. Smug, crooked, and full of secrets. She was humming. Not a happy tune. Just noise. The kind people make when they're thinking about someone else. That morning, I realized I was living in a house where I had become invisible. I didn't cry. I stood there, holding a fork, while my heart made the quietest cracking sound inside my chest. And then she turned to me and asked, "Can you move your car? He's picking me up in 10. No name, no explanation, just he. Like I was supposed to already know. I didn't ask who. I didn't ask why. I just walked to the garage, keys in hand, and moved the car without a word. I left the engine running, and I didn't come back inside. That was the moment. Not when I found the texts. Not when I saw the hotel charge. Not when she said she needed space. It was the eggs. It was the way she walked past me like I was a coat rack with a pulse. So I left. No suitcase. No shouting match. No dramatic pause in the doorway. I just walked away. No words. No goodbye. And she still doesn't know I heard everything she said about me the night before. But she will. The moment I stepped outside, the cold air felt sharper than it should have. Not because it was winter, it wasn't, but because for the first time in years, I had no clue where I was going or who I was outside of her orbit. I just kept walking. Past our mailbox that still had her name taped above mine. Past the neighbor's yard where she once said we'd build a fence but never did. Past the parked cars and the perfectly ordinary lives that didn't look anything like mine anymore. My phone buzzed twice in my pocket. I didn't look. I didn't need to. She wasn't texting me. She never did unless she needed a bill paid or wanted to know where the scissors were. And I wasn't about to be the guy who begged for crumbs anymore. I walked to a small diner 2 blocks away. One of those places where the coffee tastes like regret, and the waitress always calls you honey, no matter how dead your eyes look. I sat in the corner booth with my back to the window and tried to remember the last time I felt like someone. Not something. The night before had played on a loop in my head. Her voice was low, careful, but not careful enough. I had stood just outside our bedroom, holding a laundry basket, frozen in place like a badly written character in a soap opera. She was on the phone with someone, him, and her words weren't even cruel. That would have made them easier to dismiss. They were casual, relaxed, honest. "I don't even feel guilty anymore," she said. "He doesn't ask questions. He just exists. It's like living with a shadow." A shadow. That's what I had become. Not a man. Not a husband. A ghost she kept around for convenience. I should have said something. I should have thrown the door open. Told her I heard everything. Told her I deserved more. But I didn't. I did what shadows do. I disappeared. And now I sat in that booth, stirring cream into lukewarm coffee, wondering how someone could sleep next to you for years and not see you fading away. The waitress brought me a slice of pie without me asking. Pity pie. That's what I called it. Maybe she saw it in my eyes, that dull, broken glaze people wear when they're on the edge of unraveling. I thanked her with a voice I barely recognized. I didn't go back home that night. I booked a cheap room at a roadside motel using points I'd been saving for an anniversary trip that never happened. I stared at the ceiling until the cheap air conditioner wheezed itself to sleep. Around 2:17 a.m. She called. Not once. 3 times. I didn't answer. I wanted her to feel it. The silence. The space. The slow realization that I wasn't coming back. Not to the house. Not to her. Not to the version of me she had broken down and buried beneath, "He's boring. And he just exists." She would wake up and find the car gone. No note. No bags missing. Just me erased. And that would be her first clue. Because the man she used to know would have written a letter. He would have cried in the kitchen. He would have begged, apologized for things that weren't his fault. But that man was gone. Now there was only silence. And it was finally painfully loud. The next morning, I woke up to sunlight piercing through thin motel curtains and the stale scent of carpet cleaner. For a second, I forgot where I was. My arm reached for the other side of the bed, muscle memory, I guess, and found nothing but a crumpled sheet. The room was quiet, just the faint hum of traffic and the occasional buzz of a vending machine outside. No dogs barking, no kettle whistling, no footsteps above me. And oddly enough, I didn't miss any of it. I checked my phone. 7 missed calls. 3 voicemails. 1 text. From her. It simply said, "Where are you?" Not "Are you okay?" Not "Please call me." Just a demand. And I could almost hear the annoyance in those 3 words. Like I was late for something. Like my sudden disappearance was an inconvenience. Not a rupture in the life we built together. I didn't respond. Couldn't. If I texted back, I knew I'd crumble. I'd explain myself like I always did. Offer her the emotional roadmap to understand my pain. Only for her to roll her eyes and call it overthinking. So instead, I powered off the phone and dropped it into the motel dresser drawer. Later that day, I drove to a part of town we never went to. A strip mall with an old laundromat, a half-empty gym, and a barber shop with sun-bleached posters from 2009. I sat in my car for an hour, just watching people live lives that weren't shattered. A teenage couple argued over a smoothie order. A woman helped her elderly father into a car. A man in a delivery uniform lit a cigarette like it was his first breath of the day. And me? I sat there like a man without a title. Not a husband. Not a friend. Just Everett. No attachments. No expectations. No noise. But the silence didn't last. That evening, I got a call on my emergency number, the one tied to my work phone, which she never used. My heart spiked. I answered, thinking maybe something serious had happened. But it was her voice. Cold, tight, controlled. "So you're punishing me now?" she asked. I didn't speak. "You could have at least told me. You just walked out like some coward." Still, I said nothing. She laughed bitterly. "You think disappearing makes you a hero? It makes you pathetic. You couldn't handle reality, so you ran." And then she hung up. I stared at the screen until it dimmed. That conversation, if you could even call it that, told me everything I needed to know. She wasn't scared. She wasn't remorseful. She was angry I had slipped out of her control. That was it. I was never a partner. I was a placeholder. Reliable. Predictable. Easy to dismiss. But now, I was gone. I went back to the motel, sat on the edge of the bed, and pulled out the box I'd packed without thinking. Inside was a tangle of things I didn't know why I'd taken. A photo strip from a road trip, the broken keychain she gave me as a joke, a receipt from our first dinner that I somehow never threw away. I stared at them, not out of nostalgia, but because I needed to understand how all of that turned into this. I wanted to cry, but the tears wouldn't come. Just this dull ache in my chest that made breathing feel like a chore. I thought about deleting her number, blocking her, starting over somewhere far. But it felt too soon, like trying to clean up the crime scene before the blood even dried. So I sat there in that cheap motel room, surrounded by pieces of a marriage that had already turned to dust, and realized something that scared me more than anything she could ever say. She didn't lose me. She gave me away. It took her exactly 48 hours to switch tactics. From silence to rage to sudden sweetness. I got a text the next morning that simply said, "I'm sorry." That was it. No punctuation. No name. As if the lack of detail was supposed to make it more sincere. I stared at that screen for a full 5 minutes, waiting for my heart to do something. To lurch, to flutter, to ache. But all I felt was numb. Like she was texting a version of me that didn't live here anymore. That evening, she called again. I didn't answer. Not out of spite, but because I knew if I heard her voice at that moment, I'd break whatever fragile boundary I'd managed to build between us. So I let it ring, for times. Then it stopped. 5 minutes later, another text came in. "Can we just talk, please?" And there it was, the one-word plea. Please. The same word she used the night I cried in the kitchen and begged her to just listen to me for 5 minutes. The same word I'd repeated in so many variations. Please talk to me. Please be honest. Please come home before midnight. Please stop making me feel invisible. But now, when she said it, it didn't feel like a bridge. It felt like a hook. A subtle attempt to reel me back into the role I had finally stepped out of. I didn't reply. I took a walk instead. Through unfamiliar streets. Past strangers who had no idea I was unraveling on the inside. I watched a couple argue in a parking lot. Their words muffled but their body language loud. The man threw up his hands. The woman crossed her arms. And then, just like that, they climbed into the same car and drove off together. I couldn't decide if I envied them or pitied them. Probably both. Back at the motel, I turned on the TV just to hear something other than my own thoughts. I sat there, watching a game show I didn't care about, half listening to a man shout answers while my brain kept wandering back to her. To Lorna. Was she pacing the living room? Had she opened the drawer and seen it was still full of my things? Had she realized I left everything behind? Not because I'd return, but because none of it meant anything anymore? Around midnight, I finally broke and opened my email. There was one from her sent hours earlier. The subject line was just my name. The message inside wasn't long, but every line was carefully written like she wanted it to be the start of a redemption arc. She said she was sorry if she had hurt me. Not that she had, just if. She said things had been off for a while, and she didn't know how to fix them. She said she missed the way I used to make her laugh. And then, the part that sealed it for me, I never meant to make you feel like you didn't matter. That line felt like someone handing me an umbrella after I'd already drowned. I sat there in the glow of that cheap motel lamp, rereading it, waiting for it to feel like something more than damage control. But it didn't. Because the truth is, you don't have to mean to hurt someone to still shatter them. And you don't get to claim innocence when you never bothered to notice the bleeding. I didn't respond. Instead, I started writing something else. A letter. Not to her, to myself. The man I used to be. The man who tolerated neglect in the name of patience. Who confused silence with peace. Who made excuses for the empty seat beside him at dinner. For the missed birthdays, the dry apologies. The nights she came home smelling like a perfume that wasn't hers. I told him he deserved better. And for the first time in years, I believed it. The letter sat in my duffel bag for nearly a day before I did anything with it. I wasn't sure if I even wanted her to see it. It wasn't crafted to win sympathy or deliver some final mic drop. It was just raw. Ugly in parts. Confessional in others. I had written it the way I used to talk to her when we were still human, when I believed words could save things. But this time, the words were only for me. Until they weren't. Around 10:30 the next night, I drove past our house. The porch light was still on, as if it had been waiting for me. I didn't park. I didn't even slow down. I just circled the block 3 times before pulling into the alley behind the neighbor's shed, cutting the engine, and stepping out with the letter folded 3 times and sealed in a plain envelope. No name on it. Just the words, "Since you never asked." I crept through the shadows like some amateur thief in my own life. The dogs didn't bark. The blinds were drawn. I slipped the envelope through the mail slot, stood there for 3 full seconds listening for movement inside, and when I heard none, I turned around and vanished back into the darkness, unnoticed, just like I had been for months. I didn't go back to the motel. I drove to a 24-hour diner on the edge of town. One of those places where the waitresses wear their exhaustion like a second apron and the booths are all cracked vinyl. I ordered pancakes I couldn't taste and stared at the glowing open sign until the sun started bleeding into the horizon. I kept waiting for a feeling. Relief. Closure. Something. But it never came. Until noon the next day. That's when I got the email. 1 line. No greeting. No punctuation. Just, "How dare you?" That was it. No elaboration. No response to what I'd written. Just an accusation. As if my truth was somehow more offensive than her betrayal. I should have been angry, but instead I laughed. Quietly. Bitterly. Alone in that motel room with the peeling wallpaper and the hum of the mini-fridge. because that one sentence confirmed everything I'd been too afraid to say out loud. Lorna wasn't sorry. She was insulted, offended that I had finally found a voice louder than my silence. She didn't want me to leave, not because she loved me, but because she liked the version of me that stayed. The quiet version, the predictable one, the placeholder who didn't argue when plans changed or when lies slid between her teeth like they belonged there. But the man who wrote that letter? He was dangerous to her control, and she knew it. Later that day, she called again. This time, I answered. I didn't speak. She said my name twice. Then, as if she was still trying to measure how much of me she could reach, she said softly, "You think you're stronger than this, but you're not." I almost said something then, almost, but I caught myself, because answering her, even to defend myself, would still mean playing her game. So I hung up, and for the first time in what felt like forever, I didn't feel small. The motel manager knocked on my door that morning, asking if I was planning to stay another week. I said yes without thinking, even though I hadn't slept properly in days. It felt like the longer I stayed away from her, the more I could breathe, but also the less I recognized myself. I wasn't a man rebuilding his life. I was a man hovering in between, a ghost of a husband, a man who left, but hadn't yet arrived anywhere new. I spent that afternoon driving aimlessly through neighborhoods that weren't mine. I watched strangers mow lawns, walk their dogs, yell at kids from front porches, normal people with normal arguments and normal chaos. I envied them, not because their lives were better, but because they were still in them. Mine had become a series of pauses and shadows. Later, I stopped at a quiet park on the edge of town. I sat on a splintered bench under a dead tree and stared at a couple having a picnic across the field. They were laughing about something. Not in a performative social media way, real laughter. It reminded me of Lorna before she hardened. There was a time when she used to nudge me during boring dinners and whisper inappropriate jokes just to make me lose it. She used to laugh like she didn't care who was watching. But somewhere along the line, her laugh changed. It became quieter, calculated, as if even joy had to be curated for someone else's benefit. And somehow, I never noticed the moment it happened. I checked my phone. One new voicemail. I didn't listen to it, but I read the transcript. It was her. She said, "I need to talk to you. It's important. Don't be stupid." The last 3 words stuck with me. Not because they were cruel, but because they were so her. No ownership, no vulnerability. Just an insult wrapped in desperation. That night, I did something I hadn't done in years. I opened up an old social media account I hadn't used since our wedding. My name was still listed as Married to Lorna. I clicked through photos, smiling vacations, awkward group shots, blurry dinners with friends who had long since drifted away. It looked like a life, a happy one, but I knew better now. Most of those smiles were timed, staged, posted after fights, posted to hide them. As I scrolled, I noticed something. In almost every photo, I was the one reaching for her. An arm around her waist, a hand on her shoulder, leaning toward her. But she never leaned back. Not once. It was so subtle I'd never seen it before. I had spent years reaching for someone who never moved an inch toward me. And suddenly, the weight of it all hit me. Not just her betrayal, but mine. I had betrayed myself over and over by staying, by accepting less, by calling her coldness stress, by turning loneliness into routine. I closed the app and turned off the phone. And then I did something I didn't expect. I drove back to the house, not to see her, not to talk, but because I wanted to stand outside and look at it from a distance. To prove to myself that I didn't belong there anymore. That whatever version of us had existed inside those walls had long since died, and I hadn't held the funeral until now. When I parked across the street, the curtains were drawn. The porch light was off. The front door looked exactly the same, but it didn't feel like home. Not even a little. It felt like a museum, full of artifacts from a relationship that people would walk through and say, "What a shame." I stayed in the car for 5 minutes. No one came out. No lights turned on. No messages. Just stillness. Then I whispered it to myself. I'm done. And this time I meant it. 2 days passed after I parked outside the house, and I didn't hear from her once. Not a call, not a text, not even another shallow attempt to bait me back with guilt. And that silence, it didn't feel like peace. It felt like strategy. Lorna had always been good at turning silence into a weapon. When she didn't get her way, she didn't scream or throw things. She just withdrew, made herself cold, and waited until I cracked under the weight of being ignored. It used to work. Every time. I'd come crawling, apologizing for things I didn't even understand, just to make the frost melt. But this time, the silence was mine, and I wasn't giving it back. I had moved to a short-term rental on the other side of the city by then. A tiny basement unit with exposed pipes and no windows, but it was mine. No ghosts of past arguments clinging to the walls. No scent of her perfume lingering in the sheets. Just the sound of my own breathing, finally uninterrupted. I started waking up early, not because I had to, but because my body no longer felt like it was on standby, waiting for the next emotional ambush. That's when I started sorting through the pieces, the bank accounts, the insurance, the passwords she never bothered to remember but always demanded I manage. I found transactions I hadn't noticed before. Not just dinners or hotel stays. There were gifts, jewelry. One piece I remember her wearing and lying about. A friend from work gave it to me. Turns out the friend was named Darren, and he wasn't from work. He was from a conference she attended 2 years ago. The same conference she told me was boring and uneventful. I didn't confront her. I didn't send screenshots. I just printed them, put them in an envelope, mailed them to the house with no return address. No note, no explanation, just proof. The kind she couldn't spin or twist. I imagined her opening it, expecting some dramatic plea, and instead being handed her own secrets, lined up like broken teeth. That was enough for me. A week later, I filed for divorce. I didn't tell her beforehand. I used the same method she had used to communicate so many of her disappointments. Cold, impersonal, distant. A formal notice delivered to the front door. Signed, dated, irreversible. That evening, she finally called. Not on my phone, but on my sister's. I didn't know they were still in touch. My sister texted me first. She's asking to speak to you. She says it's urgent. I replied with 2 words. It's not. But then the voicemail came. This one I listened to. Her voice was shaky. Not angry this time. Confused, desperate, scattered. She asked why I was doing this. She said I should have talked to her first, given her a chance. She said, "You just walked away, Everett. You didn't even look back." That's when I paused the recording, because I needed to sit with that sentence. She was right. I didn't look back. And for once, I didn't regret it, because looking back only ever led to one thing, staying. And I was done staying in a place where I had to beg to be seen. That night, I packed the few things I had and locked up the basement apartment. I left no note, no forwarding address. My final act wasn't dramatic. It wasn't a grand finale. It was a whisper of freedom, carried out in silence. And she would wake up in the morning with one undeniable truth settling in her chest like smoke. I was gone. Not just physically, emotionally, permanently. And no apology, no memory, no rewritten story would undo the one decision I made quietly but completely. I didn't need closure. She needed to feel the absence. The morning I truly disappeared was unremarkable to anyone but me. No suitcases in the trunk. No teary-eyed glances in the rearview mirror. I left with just a backpack, a passport, and a one-way ticket booked under a different email address. No destination I had dreamed of. Just a place where no one would ask me why I looked so hollow. I needed the kind of quiet you don't find at the end of an argument, but in the beginning of a new life. I didn't leave revenge. I didn't leave bitterness. I left space. Space for her to feel what it was like when the man she mocked, ignored, and belittled no longer stood in the corner of the room like a piece of furniture. I didn't burn her photos or shred the memories. I just let them become what they were always meant to be, lessons. The day the divorce was finalized, I didn't cry. I went for a walk along a rocky shoreline in a city I'd never been to before. I bought myself a coffee I couldn't pronounce and watched the tide roll in. And for the first time in years, I felt the weight lift. Not all at once, but gradually, like my body was remembering what it meant to belong to me. I wasn't someone's disappointment anymore. I wasn't someone's backup plan or emotional punching bag. I was just Everett. Tired. Healing. Real. Months have passed now. I have new routines. I wake up early and write. I go entire days without looking at my phone. I've met people who know nothing about Lorna, nothing about what I endured, and somehow that makes it easier to breathe. I even laugh again, real laughter, not the kind that's filtered through tension. I laugh at stupid things. Stray cats on rooftops. Bad coffee. My own terrible handwriting. Life in all its quiet oddness. And no, I never heard from her again. I suspect she's told her version of the story to a dozen people. How I abandoned her. How I changed. Maybe she leaves out the parts that matter. Maybe she doesn't. But that's not my business anymore. Because the truth is, walking away wasn't weakness. It was power. It was peace. It was the first real act of self-respect I had shown myself in a decade. And if you're watching this right now, wondering if it's too late to reclaim your own voice, let me say this. It never is. You don't need permission to leave pain behind. You don't need applause or validation. You just need one moment of courage. One step toward the door. One breath of air that feels different from the air that's been keeping you numb. And when you finally take that step, not out of rage but from calm, the world doesn't end. It begins. Thank you for following my journey. That was my story.